Why being nobody is your ultimate power. The Tao. In a world where everyone is fighting to be noticed, admired, followed, and remembered, the Tao offers a teaching that seems almost impossible to accept. Your greatest power begins the moment you stop trying to become someone. Modern society measures success through visibility. It teaches that your worth depends on how many people know your name, how loudly your opinions are heard, and how impressive your achievements appear to others. From childhood, we are encouraged to build an identity, protect a reputation, compete for recognition, and constantly prove our value. Yet the more we chase importance, the more exhausted we become. The need to be acknowledged slowly transforms into an invisible prison where peace becomes impossible because our happiness depends on the opinions of others. Taoism points in the opposite direction. It suggests that what is empty can never be broken, what seeks no recognition cannot be humiliated, and what does not compete can never truly lose. This is not a philosophy of weakness or resignation. It is the discovery of an entirely different kind of strength, a strength that cannot be taken away because it never depended on external approval in the first place. Throughout history, nature has quietly demonstrated this truth. The deepest valleys collect the rivers because they remain lower than everything else. The strongest trees survive storms not because they resist the wind, but because they bend with it. Water reaches every destination precisely because it refuses to insist on a fixed shape. The Tao invites us to observe these patterns and recognize that reality itself favors humility over arrogance, flexibility over rigidity, and emptiness over excess. Being nobody does not mean lacking value. It means becoming free from the endless performance of trying to appear valuable. It means releasing the exhausting burden of defending an image. It means allowing your actions to emerge naturally instead of constantly asking how they will be judged. Lao Tzu repeatedly praised those who accomplish great things without seeking credit, who possess wisdom without displaying it, and who lead others without placing themselves above them. According to the Tao, the person who no longer needs admiration becomes impossible to manipulate because praise no longer controls them and criticism no longer destroys them. They become like the sky, untouched by the changing weather beneath it. Ironically, many of history's wisest individuals were not obsessed with becoming famous. They devoted themselves to understanding life rather than promoting themselves. Their influence lasted precisely because it was never their primary objective. The Tao teaches that genuine influence arises naturally from authenticity, not from ambition. In today's digital age, this wisdom feels more relevant than ever. Social media constantly encourages comparison, self-promotion, and the pursuit of validation through numbers. People carefully curate identities that often become heavier than their true selves. Anxiety increases because maintaining an image requires endless energy. The Tao gently asks, what if the image itself is the source of suffering? What if freedom begins not by improving your reputation, but by caring less about having one? This journey is not about disappearing from society or abandoning responsibility. It is about discovering the immense power that emerges when your identity is no longer your prison. It is about recognizing that peace belongs to those who no longer need to prove they deserve it. Throughout this exploration, we will uncover why the Tao considers invisibility a hidden strength, how humility becomes a form of invincibility, why the ego creates endless conflict, and how releasing the need to be somebody opens the door to profound inner freedom. In the end, you may discover that becoming nobody is not losing yourself at all. It is finally meeting the self that existed before the world told you who you had to be. The invisible strength of becoming nobody. Every human being begins life without a constructed identity, A newborn possesses no reputation, no status, no achievements, no social role, and no concern about recognition. There is simply existence, pure, immediate, and effortless. Yet as the years unfold, layer upon layer of identity is added. Parents assign expectations, schools compare performance, society rewards conformity. Careers define success, friends create labels. Eventually, many people no longer know who they are beneath the countless descriptions they have accumulated. They become so identified with titles, accomplishments, failures, opinions, and personal history that they mistake these temporary labels for their essential nature. Taoism invites us to question this entire process. Lao Tzu never argued that identity is inherently evil. Rather, he suggested that excessive attachment to identity creates suffering because anything constructed can eventually be threatened, challenged, or lost. The stronger the attachment to being someone, the greater the fear of becoming no one. This fear silently governs much of human behavior. People compete not only for resources but for significance. They seek admiration because it temporarily reinforces the fragile image they have built of themselves. Unfortunately, every compliment creates a new dependency, because once recognition becomes part of one's identity, losing recognition feels like losing oneself. This is why so many individuals live in constant psychological tension. They are not protecting their lives, they are protecting the stories they tell themselves about who they are. The Tao recognizes this struggle as unnecessary. Imagine standing beside a quiet mountain lake. The water reflects everything perfectly because it does not insist on becoming the trees, the clouds, or the sky. It remains empty enough to receive them all without clinging to any reflection. Likewise, the person who no longer clings to a fixed identity becomes capable of responding naturally to every circumstance. They are not imprisoned by the need to appear intelligent, successful, spiritual, or important. They simply respond according to what the moment requires. This flexibility becomes an extraordinary form of strength because rigid identities inevitably collide with reality. Life constantly changes. Careers end, beauty fades, wealth fluctuates, relationships evolve, public opinion shifts overnight. If one's sense of self depends upon any of these external conditions, peace becomes impossible. The Tao therefore encourages becoming like water, not because water lacks character, but because it refuses unnecessary rigidity. Water fills every container without losing its essence. It nourishes everything without demanding recognition. It reaches the ocean by flowing around obstacles rather than fighting through them. This is precisely how the Tao understands authentic power. Modern culture often mistakes visibility for influence, yet some of the most powerful forces in existence remain largely invisible. Gravity shapes galaxies without announcing itself. Roots nourish forests beneath the soil where no one applauds them. The wind transforms landscapes, although it cannot be grasped. Likewise, the individual who quietly cultivates wisdom exerts influence without requiring attention. Lao Tzu repeatedly emphasized that the highest virtue resembles water because it benefits all things while occupying the lowest places that others avoid. Becoming nobody, therefore, does not mean becoming insignificant. It means abandoning the exhausting competition to appear significant. Once this competition ends, tremendous energy becomes available for genuine living. Consider how much of ordinary life revolves around impression management. Conversations are carefully edited. Social interactions become performances. Even generosity may secretly seek admiration. The ego constantly asks, "How does this make me look?" Instead of directly experiencing life, many people experience themselves experiencing life. They become observers of their own image rather than participants in reality. Taoism gently dissolves this self-consciousness. When there is no image to defend, every moment becomes lighter. Actions arise naturally instead of strategically. Speech becomes simpler because it no longer seeks validation. Silence becomes comfortable because it no longer feels like invisibility. This transformation represents one of the deepest freedoms available to human beings. Lao Tzu observed that those who know do not speak excessively, while those who speak excessively often reveal their insecurity. This teaching is frequently misunderstood as encouraging silence for its own sake. In reality, it points toward the disappearance of egoic self-display. The wise person speaks when speech serves harmony. They remain silent when silence serves harmony. Neither choice exists to strengthen an identity. Both arise naturally from presence. This effortless responsiveness contrasts sharply with the ego's constant calculations about status, recognition, and superiority. The paradox becomes increasingly clear. The less one needs to be important, the more one's actions naturally acquire depth and authenticity. History offers countless examples of individuals whose greatest contributions emerged not from self-promotion, but from sincere dedication to truth, compassion, craftsmanship, or wisdom. Their influence lasted precisely because it was rooted in something deeper than personal ambition. Taoism reminds us that authentic greatness resembles fragrance carried by the wind. It spreads naturally, without advertisement. The person who has become nobody cannot easily be manipulated through flattery or insult because neither praise nor criticism determines their value. They no longer need to win every argument because they are no longer defending an identity. They no longer fear being misunderstood because their peace does not depend upon universal agreement. Such freedom appears almost supernatural within a culture driven by comparison, yet according to the Tao, it simply reflects alignment with reality itself. Nature does not compete, yet everything is accomplished. The sun does not seek admiration, yet it illuminates the world. Rivers do not boast, yet they shape continents. Flowers never compare themselves to neighboring flowers, yet each blooms completely according to its nature. Human beings alone spend extraordinary amounts of energy attempting to become someone other than what they already are. The Tao gently invites us to stop, not because ambition is inherently wrong, but because endless self-construction prevents direct participation in life. When the need to become somebody finally relaxes, an astonishing discovery emerges. Beneath every identity, there has always existed a quiet awareness, untouched by success or failure, praise or blame, gain or loss. This awareness requires no recognition because it was never incomplete. The Tao suggests that returning to this original simplicity is not regression, but liberation. The person who becomes nobody loses nothing real. They merely release the burdens that never truly belonged to them in the first place. Why the ego fears being nobody. If becoming nobody brings such profound freedom, why do so few people choose this path? The Tao answers this question with remarkable simplicity, because the ego believes that without importance it will disappear. The ego survives by creating separation, comparison, and identity. It constantly whispers that you must become more, achieve more, possess more, and be recognized more than you are today. It convinces you that your value depends upon maintaining an image that others admire. The tragedy is that this pursuit never truly ends. No matter how much success is accumulated, the ego immediately invents another standard to chase. It cannot rest because its existence depends on perpetual dissatisfaction. Lao Tzu observed this pattern centuries ago. He understood that human suffering rarely comes from reality itself, but from the endless mental struggle against what is. The ego is never interested in the present moment because the present offers nothing to improve. It is always looking toward an imagined future where it will finally become complete. Yet that future never arrives because the ego continuously moves the destination. Like a traveler chasing the horizon, it spends its entire existence pursuing something that retreats with every step. Taoism invites us to see through this illusion. The moment you recognize that completeness cannot be achieved through external identity, the ego begins to lose its authority. One of the greatest fears the ego carries is invisibility. It wants to be noticed because attention feels like proof of existence. This explains why so many people become uncomfortable when they are ignored. A conversation where no one acknowledges their opinion can feel surprisingly painful. A social media post that receives little engagement can create anxiety far beyond its actual importance. A promotion given to someone else may feel like a personal attack rather than an ordinary event. These reactions reveal something deeper than disappointment. They reveal identification with an image. The ego quietly says, "If people do not recognize me, perhaps I am nothing." The Tao gently responds, "Precisely," and there is great freedom in that nothingness. Nature offers endless examples of this principle. The roots of an ancient tree remain hidden beneath the earth. No visitor admires them, no photographs celebrate them. Yet without those invisible roots, the magnificent tree could never exist. Likewise, the deepest currents of the ocean remain unseen, while the waves attract all the attention. Which is more powerful? The wave appears dramatic for a moment before disappearing. The current quietly shapes entire coastlines over centuries. The Tao repeatedly encourages us to become like the hidden root rather than the noisy branch, like the silent current rather than the crashing wave. Real strength often grows where no applause exists. The ego resists this because it interprets humility as weakness. Modern culture reinforces this misunderstanding. From an early age, many people are taught to advertise themselves, promote themselves, defend themselves, and ensure they receive proper credit. While confidence has its place, excessive self-importance slowly becomes exhausting. Every interaction becomes a negotiation of status. Every disagreement becomes a threat to identity. Every criticism feels like an attack on one's existence. Living this way demands enormous psychological energy. The Tao asks a simple question: what happens if there is no image left to defend? Suddenly, criticism becomes information rather than injury. Praise becomes pleasant but unnecessary. Success becomes an experience rather than an identity. Failure becomes a lesson rather than a definition. Life becomes fluid because the self is no longer rigid. This is one of the most misunderstood teachings in Taoism. Becoming nobody does not mean abandoning self-respect or pretending to have no abilities. It means refusing to build your worth upon those abilities. Imagine a master craftsman who creates extraordinary work. The ego says, "This masterpiece proves I am superior." The Tao says, "This masterpiece simply flowed through you today." The difference appears subtle, but transforms everything. In the first perspective, every future project becomes a test of personal value. In the second, each creation becomes another opportunity to participate in the unfolding of life. There is joy without pressure because identity is no longer attached to performance. Lao Tzu often warned that those obsessed with displaying wisdom rarely possess it. Genuine wisdom has no need to announce itself. It resembles a candle in a dark room. The candle does not proclaim, "Look how brightly I shine." It simply burns. Those who need light naturally gather around it. In contrast, the ego constantly seeks confirmation that it is brighter than every other candle. Ironically, this comparison distracts it from simply giving light. The Tao teaches that authentic influence emerges naturally when self-consciousness disappears. The ego also fears uncertainty because identity depends upon predictability. It prefers fixed labels: successful, intelligent, attractive, spiritual, influential, accomplished. These labels create an illusion of stability, yet reality refuses to remain fixed. Health changes, wealth changes, relationships change, societies change, even personalities evolve over time. The more tightly someone clings to a permanent identity, the more painful these inevitable changes become. The Tao offers a radically different approach. Instead of asking, "Who am I?" it encourages asking, "How can I flow with what this moment requires?" Identity gives way to responsiveness. Flexibility replaces certainty. Life becomes participation instead of resistance. This flexibility is beautifully illustrated by water, one of Lao Tzu's favorite metaphors. Water never argues with the shape of its container. It does not lose itself by adapting. Rather, adaptation reveals its true strength. It wears away mountains not through aggression, but through persistence. It nourishes every living thing without discrimination. It remains soft, yet over time it overcomes even stone. The ego cannot understand this because it equates softness with defeat. The Tao recognizes softness as endurance. The rigid branch snaps during the storm. The flexible branch survives because it yields. Likewise, the person who does not insist upon preserving a rigid identity remains psychologically resilient through every season of life. Many spiritual traditions describe a similar transformation using different language. They speak of dying before death, emptying oneself, surrendering the false self, or awakening from illusion. Taoism approaches the same reality with remarkable gentleness. There is no violent battle against the ego. There is simply clear observation. When you carefully observe the ego, you notice that it is always chasing, defending, comparing, fearing, remembering, or anticipating. Rarely is it simply present. This observation alone begins dissolving its dominance. The ego cannot survive prolonged awareness because awareness reveals its patterns without becoming trapped inside them. Another reason the ego fears becoming nobody is that it mistakes silence for emptiness. Yet Taoism distinguishes between emptiness and absence. The empty cup is useful precisely because it is empty. The open valley receives rivers because it does not insist on being full. The doorway functions because of the empty space within it. Likewise, the human mind becomes receptive only when it is no longer overcrowded with self-importance. The person obsessed with proving themselves has little room left to truly listen, learn, or perceive. Their mind is occupied with maintaining identity. The humble mind remains spacious. It can change because it is not imprisoned by certainty. This spaciousness creates extraordinary creativity. Artists, musicians, philosophers, and inventors often describe their greatest insights as arriving unexpectedly when they stopped forcing solutions. They speak of entering a state where actions seem to happen through them rather than from them. Taoism calls this Wu Wei, effortless action. Wu Wei does not mean laziness or passivity. It means acting without the unnecessary interference of ego. The archer who stops obsessing over winning suddenly shoots more accurately. The musician who stops trying to impress suddenly plays with greater beauty. The speaker who forgets about appearing intelligent often communicates with greater authenticity. The disappearance of ego allows natural intelligence to emerge. The ego constantly demands control because uncertainty threatens its carefully constructed identity. Yet the Tao reminds us that life itself cannot be controlled. Seasons arrive without permission. Rivers ignore human expectations. Birth and death unfold according to rhythms far older than civilization. Fighting these rhythms creates exhaustion. Aligning with them creates peace. Becoming nobody therefore represents not personal defeat, but reconciliation with reality. It means recognizing that existence never required your image in order to continue unfolding beautifully. As this understanding deepens, fear gradually loses its grip. The individual begins noticing how much suffering originated not from actual circumstances, but from protecting an imaginary version of themselves. They discover that when there is no image to preserve, conflict decreases dramatically. There is less need to argue, less need to dominate conversations, less need to impress strangers, less need to explain every decision, and less need to collect approval from people who scarcely know them. This does not produce indifference toward others. On the contrary, it creates greater compassion because attention is finally free to leave the prison of self-preoccupation. Perhaps this is why Lao Tzu repeatedly described the sage as someone who appears ordinary. The sage does not seek distinction because distinction belongs to the ego. They walk quietly, speak honestly, work diligently, and leave little trace of self-importance behind them. Yet those who encounter such a person often leave feeling strangely peaceful. Nothing dramatic occurred, no extraordinary performance took place. There was simply the absence of unnecessary ego, and in that absence, something profoundly human became visible. Ultimately, the ego fears becoming nobody, because it believes identity is life itself. The Tao reveals a deeper truth. Identity is merely clothing worn by consciousness, useful at times, beautiful even, but never the essence of who you are. When the clothing changes, the one wearing it remains. When the roles disappear, awareness remains. When recognition fades, being itself remains untouched. To discover this directly is to uncover a freedom that no external circumstance can ever take away. And from that freedom, the journey into the deepest wisdom of the Tao truly begins. The hidden freedom of letting go of recognition. One of the quietest yet most powerful revolutions a person can experience is the moment they stop needing to be seen. This transformation rarely happens overnight. It unfolds slowly, often after years of chasing approval, defending reputations, collecting achievements, and discovering that none of these things provide lasting peace. At first, the realization is unsettling. The mind asks, if no one notices me, do I still matter? The Tao responds with a question even deeper. Why did you ever believe your existence depended upon being noticed? This simple inquiry begins dissolving one of the strongest illusions created by the ego. It reveals that the desire for recognition is not the same as the need for love, nor is it the same as genuine purpose. Recognition is temporary, presence is eternal. The Tao always guides us toward what cannot be taken away. Human beings naturally enjoy appreciation. There is nothing wrong with gratitude, encouragement, or being acknowledged for sincere effort. The problem begins when recognition becomes a psychological necessity instead of a pleasant experience. Once approval becomes essential, freedom quietly disappears. Every action is filtered through an invisible question. Will people admire this? Instead of living directly, we begin performing. Instead of expressing ourselves naturally, we edit every movement according to imagined audiences. The result is subtle but devastating. We lose contact with our authentic nature because our attention remains fixed on maintaining an image rather than experiencing life itself. Lao Tzu understood that this performance creates endless suffering because it has no finish line. Even the most admired individuals continue worrying about losing admiration. Fame demands maintenance. Reputation requires constant protection. Status must be defended. Public approval changes with astonishing speed. What is celebrated today may be forgotten tomorrow. The Tao observes this cycle without judgment. It simply points out that anything dependent upon external conditions cannot provide lasting peace. Therefore, placing your happiness inside the opinions of others guarantees instability. Nature demonstrates an entirely different way of existing. Consider the moon. It never shines for applause. It does not brighten itself because someone is watching. It follows its rhythm faithfully, whether millions admire its beauty or clouds hide it from every eye. Mountains do not become taller when tourists photograph them. Rivers do not flow faster because people praise them. Birds do not sing in order to increase their popularity. Every element of nature fulfills its purpose without becoming dependent upon recognition. Only human beings consistently confuse visibility with value. This confusion grows stronger in modern society. Technology has given people unprecedented opportunities to display themselves before the world. There is nothing inherently wrong with sharing one's life, creativity, or ideas. Yet beneath this possibility lies a subtle danger. It becomes increasingly easy to mistake attention for fulfillment. Numbers begin replacing inner contentment. Followers become substitutes for friendship. Visibility becomes confused with meaning. The Tao quietly reminds us that something witnessed by millions may still be empty, while something known only by a single heart may transform the world forever. The person who releases the need for recognition experiences a remarkable shift in perception. They begin noticing how many decisions were never truly their own. They chose careers partly for status. They purchased possessions partly for admiration. They entered conversations partly to appear intelligent. They even practiced kindness, expecting gratitude in return. None of this necessarily came from malicious intentions. It simply reflected how deeply the desire for validation had intertwined itself with everyday life. As awareness grows, these motivations become visible. Instead of condemning themselves, the Tao encourages gentle observation, nothing forced, nothing suppressed, simply seen clearly. This clarity gradually changes action itself. Work becomes more satisfying because it is no longer performed primarily for applause. Creativity becomes more joyful because it no longer carries the burden of proving worth. Relationships become more authentic because affection is no longer exchanged like currency. Even acts of generosity acquire new beauty when they no longer seek recognition. Lao Tzu admired those who accomplish great things and then quietly step aside, allowing others to flourish without insisting on personal credit. Such individuals discover that the act itself contains its own reward. Imagine planting a tree whose shade you will never sit beneath. Most people would ask, "Why should I?" The Tao asks, "Why shouldn't you?" This question exposes the difference between ego and wisdom. The ego calculates personal benefit. Wisdom participates in the continuity of life. It understands that existence is larger than individual identity. Every river nourishes places it will never see. Every cloud waters lands it never owns. Every forest produces oxygen for creatures that will never know its name. Nature gives without keeping records. It contributes without demanding acknowledgement. This spirit of quiet contribution transforms the human heart. Instead of constantly measuring whether efforts receive enough appreciation, attention returns to the intrinsic beauty of the action itself. Cooking for loved ones becomes meaningful because nourishment matters, not because compliments follow. Teaching becomes fulfilling because understanding grows, not because admiration increases. Listening becomes sacred because another person feels heard, not because anyone notices the listener's patience. Recognition becomes secondary. Presence becomes primary. The Tao repeatedly points toward emptiness as the source of usefulness. An empty bowl can receive food. An empty room can shelter people. An empty page can receive wisdom. Likewise, a mind no longer crowded with the desire for recognition becomes astonishingly receptive. It begins noticing details previously overlooked. Conversations become richer because attention is no longer divided between listening and self-presentation. Nature becomes more beautiful because comparison falls silent. Simple moments regain extraordinary depth. Many people mistakenly believe that letting go of recognition means abandoning ambition. Taoism never condemns excellence. It questions attachment. A master craftsman may devote decades to perfecting their skill without becoming obsessed with applause. In fact, true mastery often emerges only after external validation ceases to dominate motivation. The artist paints because beauty longs to appear. The writer writes because truth seeks expression. The gardener cultivates flowers whether visitors arrive or not. Their joy comes from participation rather than reputation. This shift also changes the experience of failure. When identity depends upon recognition, failure feels catastrophic because it threatens self-worth. Every mistake becomes evidence of inadequacy. Every criticism becomes deeply personal. But once recognition loses its central role, failure changes its meaning entirely. It becomes information, a teacher, a guide. Without the ego's constant commentary, setbacks reveal lessons instead of humiliations. This resilience grows naturally because there is no fragile image left to protect. Lao Tzu frequently described the sage as someone content with simplicity. Simplicity does not mean poverty or the rejection of comfort. It means freedom from unnecessary psychological complexity. The person no longer asks, "How can I appear extraordinary?" Instead, they quietly ask, "What is the most natural response to this moment?" These questions produce entirely different lives. One creates endless striving. The other creates harmony. There is another hidden gift within anonymity. It allows genuine observation. Those obsessed with being noticed often overlook reality because their attention remains fixed upon themselves. They enter rooms wondering how they are perceived. They speak while planning their next sentence. They hear praise and criticism through the filter of identity. By contrast, the one who no longer seeks constant recognition becomes deeply attentive. They notice changing seasons, subtle emotions, unspoken suffering, quiet beauty, and ordinary miracles. Their awareness expands because it is no longer trapped inside self-reference. This explains why many Taoist sages preferred quiet places. Solitude was never an escape from humanity. It was freedom from distraction. In silence, identity softens. The endless internal dialogue about status gradually fades. One begins hearing birds instead of opinions, wind instead of comparison, flowing water instead of ambition. Slowly, the nervous system remembers a rhythm older than civilization. The individual discovers that existence has always been enough, even before achievements, titles, and recognition entered the picture. Ironically, people who no longer seek recognition often become quietly influential. Others feel at ease around them because there is no competition. Conversations become genuine because there is no hidden agenda. Leadership emerges naturally because humility inspires trust. These individuals do not persuade through self-promotion, but through presence. Their calmness communicates more than speeches. Their consistency influences more than dramatic displays. Like a deep river, they possess strength precisely because they move without unnecessary noise. The Tao repeatedly teaches that what is soft overcomes what is hard, what is humble surpasses what is proud, and what is empty becomes useful. Letting go of recognition embodies all three principles. Humility softens the heart. Emptiness creates openness. Quiet confidence replaces restless ambition. Nothing essential is lost. Only the exhausting burden of maintaining an image disappears. Eventually, a remarkable realization dawns. The freedom sought through success, admiration, and importance was never hidden inside those things. It was hidden beneath them. Every layer of ego removed reveals a life that has been patiently waiting all along, simple, unforced, deeply alive. The person who no longer needs to be remembered discovers the joy of fully inhabiting the present moment. They are no longer living for an audience, for history, or for comparison. They are simply living, and according to the Tao, there is no greater power than that. Living like water, the unstoppable power of those who do not compete. Among all the images found in the Tao Te Ching, none appears more often or carries greater depth than water. Lao Tzu repeatedly points to water as the perfect teacher because it embodies nearly every quality the Tao invites human beings to cultivate. Water is soft, yet nothing can permanently resist it. It is humble, always flowing toward the lowest places that others reject. Yet every civilization in history has depended upon it for survival. It nourishes all living things without asking for recognition. It never argues with reality. It simply responds to every circumstance with effortless adaptability. To understand why being nobody becomes one's ultimate power, one must first understand why the Tao sees water as the highest expression of wisdom. Modern society often celebrates hardness. We admire people who dominate conversations, crush competition, never admit weakness, and constantly project confidence. Success is frequently portrayed as a battlefield where only the strongest survive. Yet nature quietly contradicts this belief every single day. Water does not conquer mountains through force. It reshapes them through patience. It never needs to prove its strength because its strength exists independently of recognition. A waterfall never announces its power. A river never boasts about reaching the ocean. They simply continue flowing according to their nature. Lao Tzu understood that this same principle applies to human life. The person who constantly competes becomes trapped in comparison. Every encounter becomes a contest. Every achievement must exceed someone else's. Every conversation contains an invisible struggle for status. This endless competition creates chronic tension because there will always be someone richer, more talented, more attractive, more influential, or more successful. The ego survives by measuring itself against others, but the Tao asks a revolutionary question. What happens when you stop measuring altogether? The answer is profound. The moment comparison ends, an extraordinary amount of energy becomes available. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every day without realizing it. After years of bearing the weight, it begins to feel normal. Only when the backpack is finally removed do you recognize how exhausting it truly was. The need to compete functions in exactly the same way. It quietly drains emotional, mental, and spiritual energy every hour of every day. When that burden disappears, life suddenly feels lighter, not because circumstances have changed, but because unnecessary resistance has ended. Water teaches this lesson beautifully. It never competes with the rocks standing in its path. Instead of insisting that the rocks move, it quietly flows around them. This is not weakness, it is intelligence. The rock resists, the water adapts. Over time, adaptation proves stronger than resistance. Entire canyons have been carved by rivers that never once declared war against the mountains. The Tao invites us to recognize that many of our personal struggles arise because we attempt to force life rather than cooperate with it. We demand certainty where uncertainty naturally exists. We insist upon control where flexibility would serve us better. We fight circumstances that cannot be changed instead of adjusting our response. This does not mean accepting injustice or abandoning responsibility. Taoism is often misunderstood as passive acceptance, but Wu Wei, the principle of effortless action, is anything but passive. It means acting in harmony with reality instead of against it. Consider an experienced sailor. They cannot command the wind to change direction. Instead, they adjust the sails. The inexperienced sailor curses the weather. The wise sailor works with it. Both encounter the same conditions, but only one moves forward gracefully. Likewise, the Tao teaches that peace belongs not to those who control life, but to those who understand its rhythms. Competition often emerges from fear. The ego believes there is not enough success, love, respect, or happiness to go around. Therefore, it constantly fights to secure its share before someone else takes it. Nature reveals a different reality. One flower blooming does not prevent another from blooming. One star shining does not dim the others. The forest thrives precisely because countless forms of life coexist rather than compete for identical roles. Every tree occupies its own space. Every bird sings its own song. Diversity strengthens the whole. Human beings, however, frequently abandon their unique path in order to imitate what society rewards. They compare chapters of their own lives to someone else's highlights and wonder why peace remains elusive. The Tao gently reminds us that comparison is impossible because no two lives are meant to unfold identically. A river should not envy a mountain. The moon should not compete with the sun. Winter has no reason to imitate spring. Each fulfills its own purpose perfectly within the larger harmony of existence. Likewise, your life loses nothing by allowing someone else to succeed. In fact, the more deeply you align with your own nature, the less interesting comparison becomes. The question shifts from, how do I measure against others, to, am I living according to what is true for me? Water also teaches humility in a way that few other symbols can. It always seeks the lowest places. Human ambition usually seeks the highest position, the greatest recognition, the highest title, the most visible achievement. Yet Lao Tzu observed that because water willingly occupies the places others avoid, everything naturally flows toward it. Valleys receive rivers precisely because they remain low. The ocean becomes the king of all streams because it stays beneath them. This is one of the greatest paradoxes in Taoism. Genuine greatness does not arise from demanding elevation, but from embracing humility. Humility is frequently misunderstood as thinking less of oneself. The Tao understands humility differently. It is simply the absence of self-obsession. The humble person neither exaggerates nor minimizes their abilities. They simply stop making themselves the center of every experience. This creates tremendous psychological freedom. Conversations become opportunities to understand rather than impress. Leadership becomes service rather than domination. Success becomes contribution rather than self-glorification. There is another remarkable quality of water. It leaves no lasting wound wherever it passes. Fire burns, storms destroy, water nourishes. Even when it reshapes landscapes, it does so through patient persistence rather than violent aggression. The Tao encourages us to cultivate this same quality in human relationships. Many conflicts arise because the ego insists on winning arguments, proving itself right, or defending pride. Yet victory achieved through domination often leaves invisible scars. The wise person asks a different question. What response preserves harmony? This does not mean avoiding difficult conversations. It means approaching them without the unnecessary violence of ego. Lao Tzu repeatedly emphasized that the soft overcomes the hard because softness remains adaptable. Rigidity eventually breaks. This principle applies not only physically, but emotionally. The person unwilling to admit mistakes becomes trapped inside them. The individual who refuses to forgive remains imprisoned by resentment. The one who cannot change old beliefs becomes increasingly disconnected from reality as life evolves. Flexibility, by contrast, allows continual growth. Just as water never loses itself by changing shape, a wise person never loses themselves by learning. Perhaps nowhere is this more evident than during periods of uncertainty. Most people experience anxiety because they crave fixed outcomes. They want guarantees about careers, relationships, finances, health, and the future. The ego believes certainty creates safety. The Tao observes that life has never been certain. Every season changes, every generation passes, every civilization evolves. Trying to freeze reality creates suffering because reality itself is movement. Water accepts movement completely. It never clings to yesterday's shape. It never fears tomorrow's destination. It exists fully within the present flow. This ability to remain present transforms ordinary life. Washing dishes becomes enough. Walking through the rain becomes enough. Sharing tea with a friend becomes enough. Watching sunlight move across a room becomes enough. None of these experiences require public recognition to possess extraordinary beauty. In fact, many of life's deepest joys occur precisely because no audience exists. They are intimate encounters between awareness and existence itself. The ego often overlooks these moments because it seeks dramatic accomplishments. The Tao treasures them because they reveal the fullness already present. One of the greatest misconceptions about competition is the belief that it produces excellence. While competition can temporarily motivate, lasting mastery usually grows from love rather than rivalry. The musician practices because music itself brings joy. The gardener tends the soil because life unfolding through plants is beautiful. The teacher continues teaching because watching understanding awaken in another human being is deeply fulfilling. These people may become extraordinarily skilled, but their excellence arises from devotion, not comparison. This distinction changes everything. When action comes from comparison, satisfaction remains fragile. Someone else's success immediately threatens it. But when action arises from genuine alignment with one's nature, fulfillment becomes independent of external rankings. A river does not question whether another river reaches the sea faster. It simply continues flowing. Likewise, the Tao encourages each person to embody their own path without becoming distracted by countless others. Living like water also means learning the art of invisible influence. Water rarely demands attention, yet nothing lives without it. The greatest teachers often shape lives quietly. The kindest acts frequently go unnoticed. Parents make countless sacrifices their children never fully recognize. Friends offer support without expecting repayment. Strangers perform simple acts of compassion that alter another person's entire day. None of these moments seek applause, yet together they sustain the world far more deeply than many celebrated achievements. Lao Tzu admired precisely this kind of hidden power. He believed the highest leaders were those whose influence became almost invisible because people naturally flourished around them. They did not dominate. They nurtured. They did not demand loyalty. They inspired trust. Like water, they supported life without becoming its center. As this understanding deepens, the need to compete gradually dissolves. One realizes that existence was never asking us to become the greatest person in the room. It was inviting us to become fully ourselves. Water never attempts to become fire. The oak never wishes to become bamboo. The eagle does not envy the whale. Each expresses the Tao through its own unique nature. The same invitation extends to every human life. When you stop competing, you stop resisting your own path. When you stop insisting upon recognition, your actions become lighter. When you stop measuring yourself against others, your own unique rhythm finally becomes audible. This is the unstoppable power of water. It cannot be defeated because it refuses unnecessary battles. It cannot be humiliated because it never sought superiority. It cannot lose itself because it was never pretending to be something else. And in that quiet, effortless way of living, the Tao reveals one of its deepest truths. The person who no longer needs to win has already discovered a victory that no one can ever take away. Returning to the Tao, discovering the infinite power of being. Every journey described by the Tao ultimately leads back to a place that was never truly lost. At first, this seems like a contradiction. How can someone spend an entire lifetime searching only to discover they have returned to where they began? Yet this is precisely the mystery Lao Tzu points toward throughout the Tao Te Ching. Human beings are born in harmony with the Tao. A child does not worry about reputation, social status, or proving their importance. They laugh freely, cry openly, become fascinated by ordinary things, and move through life with remarkable spontaneity. Gradually, however, the world teaches them to become someone. They learn to compare themselves with others, to seek approval, to defend opinions, to protect an image, and to measure their worth through achievements. By adulthood, many people have become experts at maintaining an identity while remaining strangers to themselves. The Tao does not ask them to create a new self. It invites them to remember the one that existed before fear and ambition covered it. This is why Taoism speaks so often about returning. Returning does not mean moving backward in time or rejecting civilization. It means returning inward. It means removing what is false rather than adding something new. The sculptor does not create the statue by adding stone. He reveals it by removing what does not belong. Likewise, the Tao teaches that wisdom emerges when unnecessary layers begin to fall away. The need to impress, the fear of failure, the addiction to praise, the obsession with control, the endless comparison with others, these are not your essence. They are habits, they are learned responses, they are clouds passing through a sky that has always remained untouched. The greatest irony is that people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to become extraordinary, while the Tao quietly whispers that extraordinary peace belongs to those willing to become ordinary again. Modern culture often equates ordinary with mediocrity. Lao Tzu saw it differently. The ordinary is where life actually happens. It is found in preparing tea with full attention, in listening without planning your reply, in watching leaves move with the wind, in breathing without rushing toward the next task. The ego dismisses these moments because they cannot be displayed as achievements. The Tao treasures them because they reconnect us with reality itself. When the desire to become somebody finally relaxes, a surprising transformation begins. The world appears different, even though nothing external has changed. Trees no longer become background scenery. They become living expressions of quiet endurance. Rain is no longer an inconvenience, but a reminder that life continues according to rhythms far greater than human schedules. Silence ceases to feel empty. Instead, it becomes full of subtle sounds previously ignored, the rustling of branches, distant birds, the rhythm of one's own breathing. This shift happens because attention is no longer consumed by self-concern. The world reveals itself to those who stop looking only at themselves. Lao Tzu often described the sage as someone who lives in profound simplicity. Simplicity, however, is not the absence of intelligence. It is intelligence freed from unnecessary complication. The simple person still thinks deeply, but they no longer overthink every possibility. They still plan, but they are not imprisoned by outcomes. They still work diligently, but their identity no longer depends upon success. They participate fully in life without attempting to dominate it. This is why the sage appears calm, even during uncertainty. Their peace rests upon something deeper than external circumstances. One of the most beautiful consequences of becoming nobody is the disappearance of unnecessary fear. Much of human anxiety originates not from actual danger, but from imagined threats to identity. People fear embarrassment because they believe mistakes diminish their worth. They fear rejection because they confuse another person's opinion with objective truth. They fear aging because they identify themselves with appearance. They fear failure because they mistake achievement for identity. Remove the attachment to identity, and many of these fears lose their foundation. This does not eliminate practical concerns, but it removes the emotional weight created by ego. Imagine carrying a mirror everywhere you go, constantly checking whether your reflection remains perfect. Every movement would become cautious. Every scratch upon the glass would create distress. Now imagine setting the mirror down forever. Nothing about your actual existence changes, yet an enormous burden disappears. This is what happens when attachment to self-image dissolves. Life becomes direct again. Instead of constantly observing yourself, you begin experiencing reality without interruption. The Tao also teaches that genuine security cannot be found in possessions, titles, or reputation, because all of these belong to the changing world. Wealth comes and goes, health rises and falls, nations change, families evolve. Every physical form eventually returns to the earth. The ego resists this truth because it longs for permanence. Yet the Tao suggests that permanence exists, not in forms, but in the underlying flow from which all forms arise. Just as waves continuously appear and disappear while the ocean remains, individual identities arise within a deeper reality that never ceases. Becoming nobody means identifying less with the temporary wave and more with the vast ocean itself. This perspective changes one's relationship with success. Success is no longer something to possess, it becomes something to participate in. A harvest belongs not only to the farmer but to sunlight, rain, fertile soil, countless unseen organisms, changing seasons, and the mysterious intelligence of life itself. Likewise, every personal achievement emerges from innumerable visible and invisible influences. Recognizing this naturally produces humility, not forced humility, but genuine gratitude. One realizes that no accomplishment is entirely individual. Everything arises through relationship. The Tao repeatedly reminds us that the highest virtue acts without claiming ownership. Water nourishes every living thing, yet never says, "Look what I have done." The sun gives warmth without asking for appreciation. The earth supports every step without demanding recognition. Nature performs miracles continuously while remaining completely free from vanity. Human beings possess the remarkable opportunity to embody this same quality. Imagine working wholeheartedly while releasing the need to possess every result. Imagine helping others without silently keeping score. Imagine speaking truth without insisting everyone agrees. Such a life carries extraordinary freedom because it is no longer negotiating with reality. As this freedom grows, another subtle change appears. Compassion deepens naturally. The ego separates. It constantly divides the world into winners and losers, friends and enemies, success and failure. The Tao sees interconnectedness instead. The person who no longer struggles to prove themselves becomes more capable of understanding others. They recognize that behind every boast often hides insecurity. Behind every act of anger often lies fear. Behind every attempt to dominate frequently exists deep uncertainty. Judgment softens because understanding expands. Compassion replaces superiority. This compassion does not mean becoming naive. The Tao never encourages ignoring harmful behavior. Rather, it teaches responding wisely instead of reactively. Just as water avoids obstacles without hating them, the wise person addresses conflict without becoming consumed by resentment. They understand that hatred binds them to the very thing they oppose. By remaining centered, they preserve inner freedom regardless of external circumstances. Perhaps the most profound lesson of all is that the Tao cannot be possessed. The moment someone claims complete mastery, they have already drifted away from it. The Tao remains alive precisely because it cannot be reduced to rigid formulas or permanent conclusions. Every sunrise expresses it differently. Every season reveals another aspect of its movement. Every stage of human life uncovers fresh understanding. Therefore, becoming nobody is not a destination reached once and forever. It is a continual practice of letting go. Each day offers another opportunity to release comparison, another opportunity to surrender control, another opportunity to return to simplicity. This daily return gradually transforms the quality of one's existence. Ordinary frustrations lose much of their power because identity no longer clings to them. Success becomes lighter because it no longer inflates pride. Failure becomes gentler because it no longer destroys self-worth. Relationships become more authentic because they are no longer built upon performance. Even solitude changes. Instead of feeling lonely, it becomes spacious. Silence becomes nourishing rather than uncomfortable. The person discovers that they were never actually incomplete. They were simply distracted. Lao Tzu concluded many of his teachings by pointing toward paradoxes that ordinary thinking struggles to understand. Those who humble themselves become whole. Those who let go receive. Those who do not compete cannot be defeated. Those who become empty become useful. At first glance, these statements seem contradictory, yet life repeatedly confirms them. The rigid eventually break. The flexible endure. The proud become isolated. The humble attract trust. The anxious exhaust themselves chasing certainty, while those who accept uncertainty often move through life with remarkable peace. This is the hidden treasure of becoming nobody. It is not self-erasure, it is self-liberation. It is the quiet discovery that your deepest value never depended upon titles, admiration, wealth, or accomplishment. Long before the world knew your name, life welcomed you completely. Long after your name is forgotten, the rivers will continue flowing, the stars will continue shining, and the Tao will continue expressing itself through all things. Realizing this does not diminish human life, it gives it profound dignity. You no longer need to force yourself into history because you already belong to something infinitely greater than history. In the end, the person who embraces being nobody discovers a freedom that ambition alone can never provide. They walk without needing to leave footprints. They speak without needing the final word. They give without demanding repayment. They love without possessing. They lead without controlling. They succeed without becoming arrogant. They fail without becoming defeated. They become like water, gentle yet unstoppable, humble yet immeasurably powerful, silent yet capable of reshaping the world. And perhaps that is the Tao's greatest secret of all. The moment you stop trying to become someone extraordinary, you become available to something far greater than the ego could ever imagine. You become a clear channel through which life itself can flow freely. There is nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove, and nothing left to fear. In that profound simplicity, true power quietly reveals itself, not the power to control others, but the far greater power of living in complete harmony with the Tao.